Thank you very much, Ashok, and thank you everybody for the invitation, and Stella for setting the whole thing up in the first place. And like the others, I would just echo my reflections on the testimonies, but to say very sadly, a bit like Brenda said, it's just so common to hear those stories these days. And to an extent, that's what we have to be dealing with, the fact that those kinds of stories are becoming kind of normal. And, to me, that's the shocking illustration of where we've got to in maternity services and where we must row back from. Those stories must become so rare as to be almost unheard, and that's definitely not where we are now. So Brenda made some fantastic points, and I'll probably allude back to some of them as I go through. I have got some slides in this case. So the topic, as you can see, is taken from this Model T Ford comment. When the Ford first came out, apparently one of the marketing slogans was, "You can have any color as long as it's black." And I think this is the illusion of choice I want to refer to. And building on what Brenda was saying really about shared decision making, there's also another step on this, which is actually co-creation and co-production. And to an extent, and again echoing Brenda's point, we've misunderstood Montgomery and Lanarkshire, because it's supposed to be about, first of all, finding out what is material to that woman or birthing person, and then working out her, what's going to be happening in collaboration with her, flexibly tailored to her, what matters to her, and then adapted as the pregnancy, labor, and everything else goes on. And that's exactly not how it's being used. So I quite like this kind of framing of this. So co-production is a meeting of minds with shared solutions. It involves people working together from the start or to the end of the project that affects them. And it's valued where people, it's a situation where those who use it value all participants equally. And it seems to me we have to have these kinds of underpinning constructions of what we mean when we're talking about choice and control and everything else in childbirth. It's not just a tick box exercise, it's something much more profound than that. So complete co-creation here, the transparent process of value creation. So again, this is not taken from healthcare, it's taken from other fields, but this notion that in that space that where one is co-constructing, you create value. And I'm going to come back to that a little bit towards the end as well. So this actually is now applied to healthcare. So the basic co-creation is just you do what you're told. Basically, patients take their medicine or children do their homework. Intermediate is where the service recognises that the people using the services also have skills and knowledge and expertise, and that's adapted and adopted. Transformational is when you actually get power and control shifting. And this is the space that we're now wanting to move into, I think, where actually not only are individuals helping you, or are you helping an individual to make a decision, but they're actually creatively and constructively helping the professionals as well to learn and do new things they didn't do before. And the kind of framing to an extent for this, or not the framing, but the illustration that the world is moving a little bit in this direction, and many of you on this call I know will know this, are these guidelines that the WHO are now producing, where they're framing their guidelines not around the effectiveness evidence, although that is a big part of the guideline development, but the actual framing is around this notion of a positive experience, that a positive experience is critical to safe care, where women and partners and families and birthing people have a kind of life course chance of that experience becoming something which is of value to them. Absolutely not what the testimonies were saying, the opposite of that. And the quote here from Ban Ki-moon is basically saying, if we do this, then we make sure that babies have the best possible start in life. So if our focus is risk aversion primarily for the baby, well, this is how you solve that. You solve that by putting women at the centre. And you don't solve it by putting them against each other, by setting them in opposition to each other. So the policy intent is good. Personalised care is obviously a big part of the Better Births initiative. And the kind of rhetoric that underlies that many people work very hard on, is actually very positive in that regard. So women should be able to make the kind of decisions they want after full discussion of both benefits and risks. And of course, when you look at some of the guidelines, all that you get is the risks being discussed, not the benefits, which is also a deficit. So, we do know that the policy rhetoric is in this space, which is a good thing. And personalised care plans are an important part of the Better Births initiative. Now, I'm just going to give you some of the recommendations from the Ockenden report. And again, these are also in the Ockenden report. So maternity services must ensure that women and their families are listened to. This is critical and very important. And at the bottom part as well, CQC inspections must include an assessment of whether women's voices are truly heard, not just listened to, but truly heard by the maternity service through active and meaningful involvement. And this is just framed around the MBPs, but really that should be applied to all individuals, should be truly heard. And then the second one, that there must be accurate information so women can make informed choice. And again, as Brenda says, informed choice is not necessarily the whole piece, but it's obviously really important. And what Ockenden says is that women must be enabled to participate equally, and their choices should be respected. All good stuff. But then we also have this, and in fact, there are some places, I think this is Gloucester, where they're developing personalised care plans that seem to be more than just tick boxes, that do seem to be engaging with these notions of what this should be. However, part of the tension in the service is captured by this other requirement here, risk assessment throughout pregnancy. Staff must ensure that women undergo a risk assessment. But what if they don't want to, for example? So this recommendation, so that the staff have those other two previous recommendations, they're great, and then they have this recommendation, which seems to stand to an extent in opposition to the notion that women should have a choice in what they have. Women must be formally risk assessed, so they have continued access to care provision, etc., and it must include ongoing review of the intended place of birth specifically, which I think is quite interesting, and again, I'll come back to that later. So I know there's some people from Birthrights on the call, so my thanks to Birthrights. I've used a lot of the data, a few slides with data from your recent survey with Mumsnet, so thank you very much for that. So over 1,000 women who gave birth, sorry, my little box here is showing it, at least once, I think that says, yeah. And then the percentage of responses, again, some of you will know this on the call, 14% said that their decisions were overruled at various points. 11% said there was an attempt to overrule their decisions. 24% said that their decisions were not respected, but 30%, 1 in 3, said their decisions were not sought at all, which is obviously in complete opposition to what's supposed to be happening according to the rhetoric, and should be happening anyway in terms of ethical and compassionate care. So these are a few quotes from that survey. You can just read. This is online on the Mumsnet, I think, site. It was a battle, and I think that notion of the high levels of adrenaline that our first testimonial said is really reflected here. Or maybe this was the second person, whichever one. This notion that women are actually, rather than being flooded with endorphins and oxytocin when the baby's born, they're flooded with adrenaline because they're under such stress and feeling so stressed about their experiences. So mothers were put a question about the legal position, the Montgomery position, effectively. So they were said, okay, the legal position is that you are the primary decision maker and midwives and doctors are your advisors. Is that what actually happened? 45% said it did, 42% said it did not. So nearly half of the women in this survey were not actually, the legal position was not actually upheld for them. The professional or health professionals were in breach of the law, effectively. And there's this notion of protective steering. So, how do you persuade someone to make the decision you want them to make? And this is the percent of people that were given the opportunity to discuss various things. So 74% the benefits of vaginal delivery. That means 25% were not, 1 in 4. Only half were the benefits of caesarean discussed for them, or less than half. 61% were given the benefits of giving birth on a hospital ward, only 38% of giving birth at home. So in every case, the information was not given appropriately. And interestingly, the kind of countercultural case, if you like, the less acceptable case, so the caesarean on request and the home birth on request, were almost equally likely to be not discussed. So the more standard were, the less standard were not. But actually, even in the case of the more standard, there's an argument about whether risks and benefits were fully discussed for people. So again, back to protective steering, and here's a couple of quotes. Or one quote, sorry. And there could be quotes there about women wanting caesareans as well, or induction. 43% said the information wasn't tailored to their situation. More than half would have liked more information about place of birth and choices in birth. And this is a quote from another study which has recently been published. So thank you to the authors of this study, which again, I'll just let you read those quotes. I hope you can, because it's a bit faint, but this is in relation to labour induction. And these are clearly quotes from women who felt that perhaps induction wasn't right for them, or from staff. But again, there could be quotes the other way as well. So I'll just let you read them. And again, these reflect the testimonials you heard earlier. So what's in a word? Okay, so even if women are given information about various, and in this case we are talking about, and again I completely agree with what Brenda was saying, the conversation gets reduced usually to what mode of birth, what place of birth, that kind of thing. And in fact, it should be much more nuanced than that. But just to go back to the standard choice offer, if you like. So say there is a discussion about vaginal birth and this happens. And then, women are given statistics, and they're usually population level statistics. Again, as Brenda says, they should be absolute numbers per thousand rather than percentages, but we know what kind of thing gets said. So the data are presented on a population level, but of course, different hospitals differ hugely about what this might mean. So it might mean something that looks like this or this, because the birth, of course, is only what happens after the labour. And when we talk about birth, what women think about is labour and birth, not just the baby being born at the end of the day. Could be this, that's vaginal birth. Could be this. These can all happen during a vaginal birth. Or it could be this. So what are we talking about when we give women statistics about various aspects of the care that we're offering? Are we talking about what they're likely to get in their local place? Are we talking about the population norm? Or are we talking about what they could get if care was optimally designed? We don't know. So informed choice in this kind of circumstance becomes rather, I would argue, instead of co-creation, it becomes a kind of situation that we fall back on when childbirth provision is based on fight and flight, which is where we are at the moment. So I like this kind of framing here that actually, obtaining informed choice, which in itself sounds like an extraction, not like a co-production, ends up being a defense mechanism. So that business of being constantly asked to make the right decision when you made the wrong decision is a defense mechanism. It's just saying, oh, we got informed consent for, which is almost precisely, as a visual image, extraction of this informed consent, unwillingly in some cases. And I think, the business about distrust that is so deep within the NHS, and not just the NHS, actually across public sector, I think at the moment is a real problem, because the things that we're observing now are the outputs, the consequences of the way that we're currently thinking and designing public health services, and possibly private as well. And this is just a quick nod to the staff position here. And I think we're going to come back to this, hopefully. Why it was interesting, I thought, in our first story, that the midwives who were discussing, who were presumably providing antenatal care and talking about home birth, were giving very different kinds of information and behaving in very different ways than the midwives who are in the hospital. And very often you find that, this is true, I think, for obstetricians too, that in fact, this is true. I heard a story of an obstetrician who moved from one trust to another and came to a local trust and behaved in a very different way, and couldn't understand why his section rate was so much lower in the new hospital than it had been in the old one, because he thought he was behaving exactly the same and performing exactly the same, but the ethos of the organization was entirely different. So the space in which health professionals operate is really driving a lot of the things that are happening at the moment. And you can see from these two quotes from Claire Feely's work, what kinds of stresses staff are under when they're trying to square that circle. So just a few questions, really. I'm nearly finished. So what if women don't want to be risk assessed at every visit? What if what's material to the woman is to have a positive outlook on her fetus and not to be constantly told about what the risks are and having to make decisions? What if she doesn't want to make decisions? If she wants the health professional to make decisions for her, that's an active choice. Does regularly risk assessing place of birth mean using, as I say, local place of birth or population-based data? Does it include telling healthy women with healthy babies the benefits of being out of hospital as well as the risks of being out of hospital, or vice versa? What if they choose a birth centre but there's no birth centre? Or what if they choose a hospital and the hospital's full that day, which has happened in the past? Then what happens? Can all women choose to continue their pregnancy without being regularly asked to reconsider induction for simple post-maturity? The current NICE guidelines say if a woman decides not to be induced for post-maturity, ask her regularly if she wants to change her mind. What about the woman who's booked for induction? Again, in one of our testimonials, can she be asked regularly if she wants to change her mind as well? And even when she's in the hospital, can she say, no, I don't want it, and go back home and wait for the labour to start spontaneously? What is the optimum? Can women choose optimum support for spontaneous labour and birth? Can they choose an elective induction or a caesarean without medical indication? Are there limits? So what are the responsibilities that come with those rights to make a free choice? But what if you can choose any colour as long as it's right for me? What does that mean? How do we change the conversation? The conversation which is underpinning all of this stuff, as I alluded to before, the kind of toxic nature of the way that we're building services currently to be legally, to be, to protect the organisation rather than the individual. And I put this slide in. This is Jill Thompson's work, her PhD, where she looked at women who had a first traumatic birth and then a second positive birth. And what's really stuck out for me is many things, but these quotes about what the birth was. So we measure satisfaction or distress or trauma. We don't measure those positive benefits that can come when a woman gets the kind of birth she wants. And some of these women had caesarean section, some had spontaneous vaginal births, some of them had forceps. There's a whole mix of people. And in their first births, the kinds of words they used were traumatic, hell, trauma, torture, rape, abuse. Those are the words they used. In their second positive births, these are the words they used: joy, euphoria, fantastic, positive, amazing, in love, incredible. So this illustrates the point again that Brendan and others have made. It's how we are with women that makes the difference. And we really have to recognize that you not only are you risking trauma, but you're risking the loss of these benefits if we don't get it right. Even if women feel neutral about their births, that's not good enough. And I think we can look at evidence-based medicine as a route to resolving the dissonance here, because when we do look at what Sackett says, it's best evidence, whatever that is, with expertise and values, what is material to the individual, which he said 11 years ago before Montgomery and Lanarkshire. So bringing these three things together, you get an alliance, a co-production, which optimizes clinical outcomes and quality of life. So tailoring the best evidence for the individual values in the context of what the clinicians are expert at, and allowing the clinicians to be experts as well in their practice, rather than binding them by rules and guidelines that restrict them, are important. So finally, we have to start this now. I don't want to be hearing these stories in a week's time, let alone a month's time or a year's time or 10 years time. It's just not good enough. And we have to build our maternity care on, this notion on mutual respect. That's between professionals and organisations, between organisations and government bodies, and absolutely, and most importantly, women, birthing people, their partners, their families, and the whole lot. So we have to resist risk creep. We have to resist othering. We have to resist one size fits all, and we have to be doing these other things to be moving to the next place, really, that we need to get to. Thank you.